All right. How's everybody doing? We are back. This is episode number 22 of Calibrated Live with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. We're going to talk about this today because this was brutal. I just watched this interview too on Judging Freedom. It was rough. It does not sound like morale is very high in the AFU currently right now. So we will talk about that today. We got a bunch of stuff to talk about actually. Sorry, fixing my chair. There we go. Let's do this down. We also have some pretty big map updates to talk about, so that's also coming. We also have some things to talk about. Sorry, I'm rearranging stuff. Some things to talk about in terms of weapon deliveries and stuff like that. Sorry, my dog's trying to get in the shot. Be a good boy, okay? Be a good boy. All right. So to start us off, I'm gonna take us over to the map as I always do. He's trying to be the star. All right, take us over to the map. We have some pretty important map updates. So down here, the Krinky bridgehead, which had been the long-standing Ukrainian, little offensive operation that was costing them insane numbers of their, well-trained Marine Brigade units. And they were just sending them across on little boats. The boats were getting hit. The guys were getting hit with artillery in here. They'd get into here, and they're trying to hold these little buildings, which don't even exist anymore. It's all gone. I mean, it looks like World War I in no man's land right here. It's everything's blown to bits. Holes everywhere from artillery shells and so on. So a lot of fighting happening in this region is now done. The Russians have raised the flag in 3 different points across Krinky. So in terms of this being settled, I'm pretty sure that it is. Again, this is not a safe area for the Russians to be. The Ukrainians have artillery on this bank. So, you might see a video of the Ukrainian or the Russians planting a flag and then sort of like running away. I don't know why they would even plant a flag, honestly. It's just not even worth almost dying for, the PR or propaganda aspect of it. But they did it. And so Krinky is now basically wrapped up. There's probably still Ukrainian units in this marsh area right here, but none in the actual urban area. So that's it for down here. Over in the Robitny section, we had a small Ukrainian counterattack that ended up recapturing these trench fortifications, which are important for maintaining their positions actually in this destroyed village of Robitny. So the Ukrainians have recaptured these, which are very important. The Russians have also made more progress down in this region, and I believe over here. but I don't have clear geolocations for that, so I don't know exactly where and how to map that. But a little bit more progress down in here. I I believe that I was kind of right in my assessment that this is not really an offensive operation in the same way that, say, like Avdiivka or Novomihailovka is, like these areas over here. This is more of like a positional offensive where the Russians are just trying to recapture their defensive fortifications down here in the south, push the Ukrainians completely out of the first line of defense in this defense line right here, and basically reset them back to where they were in May 2023. So before the Ukrainian counteroffensive that captured, this territory right here, that's where I think they want to kind of level it out at. And this is just sort of forcing the Ukrainians to keep some force concentration here to hold this and fight the Russians off. Again, pulling resources from the areas where the more intense battles are happening, which is, down here in the south, up here around Bakhmut, and up here around Kupiansk. So you can see how the Russians are forcing the Ukrainians to be stretched out across this entire front. Moving reserves all around is not easy for the Ukrainians. It exposes the reserves. It exposes the material to, ISR, deep strike. So this is a good operation right here. This is exactly what I think the Russians should be doing. But this isn't some grand offensive that's trying to capture Orikhiv, at least for right now. There hasn't been enough force injection by the Russians to make that possible. So for now, just still positional. The Russians are recapturing what they lost, basically. And then we come over here to Pabieta, which I don't remember if I had told you guys that it was, if it had been captured yet. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk about it as if this is a new update. So Pabieta, just outside of Marinka, has been captured. If you remember a couple of episodes ago, I had talked about how important Pabieta was. I talked about how there's all of this space back here. The Russians want to capture this because there was a big fortification built around this town. It lies on this 0532 highway, the one that runs through Konstantinivka down to Ugarar. So that this was one of the most important areas on the map in the southern Donetsk region for the Ukrainians. Keeping this was vital. The Ukrainians lost, according to the Russians, we have proof of one, I believe, 3 Leopards, 2 A4 was the one that we saw abandoned. I don't know what other ones were in this region, probably also 2 A4s from the same unit. But the Russians have now captured it and are now expanding down south into this area. They should expand up into this area over here because there's just not a lot behind it. This was sort of the fortification that kind of was on the high ground and kept everything maintained. So I do think I showed you guys the topographical map. But again, I'm just going to take us over so we can see the topographical map. Marinka, Pabieta. There it is. Okay. So you guys can see what I'm talking about for all the new people in here. Remember, if you guys want to ask questions, you can do so with super thanks or whatever the super whatever is. And those are the ones that I'll answer during the live stream. And thank you, Paper Cat, for the 10 SEK. I appreciate it. Remember, you guys can ask questions with those too. So, but let me take us over to the map, topographical map. All right. So here's Pabieta. Here's the town that was just captured. And if you zoom out, you can see, let's see. Yeah, you can see how Pabieta is located sort of on this slight incline, right? It's not like greatly contrasted, but you can see how the settlements, Novomihailovka, Konstantinivka, are all on in these sort of like creek beds, right? They run along these small creek beds. Same up here with Marinka, Gorgivka, and then back over here, you can see how they just kind of follow the low ground. So the Russians want to expand out into the middle so that they can look down on both both directions, so they can push out over here as well as push down over here. And that's what they have done by securing Pabieta and also securing this territory back here. So the Russians now have whatever high ground there is in this direction, the Russians are now in control of it. And that's what Pabieta stands for. So Pabieta was very, very, very valuable. And that being lost is a major setback for the Ukrainians. Take us back over to the map. Okay, so Pabieta, there's also rumors that a good portion of Novomihailovka is now in the gray zone. The Ukrainian logistics into this town is very difficult. As you can see, the Russians probably have very good control over the roads that come in. They also have control over the north now, so we can expect Novomihailovka in the coming weeks, probably, depending on how much the Ukrainians put into it. And then pressure on Konstantinivka begins. And once pressure on Konstantinivka begins, pressure on Ugledar should also start. You can kind of see how the dominoes are starting to fall, right? Avdiivka collapsed, and now there's no real strong defense. All of those soldiers that were right in here dealing with Avdiivka and how close it was to Donetsk and everything can now be dispersed and moved out. Pushing is still going to continue in the Avdiivka salient. Out towards Berdichi and Orchitny in this direction, but there's not a new major objective right here other than Pokrovsk, right? Which I mean is important. It feeds Konstantinivka and stuff, but this is a long way away for the Russians. So immediately it frees up a large number of Russian soldiers to go and fight in other areas. And I believe you're going to see a lot of progress in this sector, this southern sector. Moving up to Bakhmut, we do have a big update here. So not on the map officially, but it is being claimed that the Russians are now in control of something like this. And do not take this as absolute fact, because it might not be, but something like this is now what the Russians control. And I think I'm going to leave this on my map, but the first streets are reportedly, the Russian soldiers have gained a foothold in the first streets. So we're going to put that in purple as unconfirmed. This is sort of just my estimation of the situation. I wanted to do this one live, but the Russians have pushed the Ukrainians out of this first street. And that means that, I mean, if they push them out of the first street, that means that they're probably in the city themselves. There's active fighting going on in the city. So that's the biggest update for today. Well, town, I guess you would call it. It's smaller than a city. It's a town, but it's vital. It's vital, and I'm going to take us over to the map again because of what it means for this area right here and what this area means for this entire region. So I'm going to take us over to the topographical map, and we're going to take a look at that again. And we're going to go up here to Bakhmut. So here's Bakhmut, here's Chasiv Yar. You can see how Chasiv Yar is on this high ground. You can see why Bakhmut was kind of the fortress city, right? The Russians on approach to the city had to deal with these very advantageous Ukrainian positions on this high ground. And then Bakhmut was in this low ground so that the Ukrainians could just shoot at the Russians basically the entire time. That's why Bakhmut was very important and very difficult to capture, was it had this fortress behind it to keep it supplied and everything. But zooming in here to Ivanivsky, so the Russians have now made their way up onto this high ground and have probably pushed into the first streets of the city, which is this street right here. And as you can see from the map, this high ground is what the Russians want. The Russians do not care about Ivanivsky in the low ground, but Ivanivsky keeps this area supplied, right? So if the Russians move in and capture this entire area on this side of the canal should be relatively easy for the Russians to push into. Once they have positions on this high ground, operations towards Chasiv Yar become much, much easier. This entire area will fall back under Russian control. And then, you're basically at the entrance into the city. So This right here is another major objective for the Russians. It's what Wagner had pushed out and captured. It's quite unfortunate that the Russians lost it to the Ukrainians just because of the fighting that's going to have to take place to recapture it. But for the Ukrainians, it was a very smart move to move across the canal and take this. However, in retrospect, you could say that doing this operation reduced the capabilities of the summer counteroffensive in the south, in Zaporozhye. So it might not have been worth it, but I think that this is way, way more valuable than Robotny. I don't think the Ukrainians were ever getting through those defense lines. So I believe that taking this back stalls the war for a much greater period of time compared to if they hadn't taken this back and they had still failed in Zaporozhye. Then the Russians would be on this high ground. They would be over here. They would not have taken any attrition in this region, and they would just be able to start pushing into Ivanivsky. So in retrospect, I think that the Bakhmut splitting up the forces and doing two separate operations was a good idea, just because I don't think that the first operation was going to succeed in and of itself. All right, back over to the map. I have a couple more updates here. We have some rumors that appear to be true now that Severne, just outside of Avdiivka, has been captured. Remember, I told you that there's not really much point in keeping these towns, like Orlivka, maybe. Stepove, no. Berdichi, probably not. Semkivka, maybe, just because it's on this, it has this water boundary, so the Ukrainians could set up a defensive line, perhaps around here. They want to protect Orchitny, but really, Stepove is not worth fighting for now that Avdiivka is gone. Severne and Tonke are not also worth fighting for. Neither is Leshtokny. So I expect most of this area to be captured with a fight by the Ukrainians, but not with the same vigor as we normally see. I think that they're going to slowly get pushed out of this entire area. And then up to the north, there were some small positional changes in Terny and Yempolivka. The Russians approached Terny and Yempolivka a little bit in these forests right here, but I don't have an exact geolocation, so no update there so far. And then up in the north, no updates, but the Russians are still fighting very, very hard here. And this salient seems to be one of the areas, this area, and then Novomihailovka in the south seems to be the area where the Ukrainians are having the most difficulties in terms of attrition and manpower loss and stuff like that. Kupiansk is becoming an ordeal for the Ukrainians. We remember Zelensky went and visited, so we can probably expect something to begin in this region in the coming weeks and months. I do believe so. All right. I wanted to talk about something that I've seen a lot since the beginning of this conflict. There's this sort of this meme, I guess you would say, that Russia has nukes, but their missiles don't work, sort of thing. I've heard it a lot from NAFO. It's like, oh, the nuclear threats don't matter because Russia's nuclear, like ICBMs and everything, are outdated. The sanctions don't allow for repairs and maintenance properly, and so on and so forth. And that's the title of this stream, is Britain's missile issues, right? And the reason for that title, and I'm going to take us over now to my Twitter, is because of a second, in very short order, a second failed Trident missile test. The missile spun around in circles and exploded directly after launch. Again, this is not what your saber rattling should look like. This is a bad look for Britain. This is a bad look for Britain on top of their completely devastated military recruitment. The consistency of their military is very poor. It's very small. If you guys remember recently, there were supposed to be those large NATO exercises. Both of Britain's aircraft carriers, or helicopter carriers, or whatever they are, they're smaller, could not attend because they were not able to, and just because of maintenance and stuff like that, they weren't seaworthy, which is I mean, that's a huge chunk of your military that's just non-operable, right? And it's not even operable for a fake war. What about a real war? So that's a very bad look. You have British ships crashing into each other, another bad look. It's just nothing really looks like it's working in the British military right now, besides maybe their special forces. So this is a very, very, very big deal, and it kind of represents that projection aspect of everything that the pro-Ukrainian crowd says about Russia tends to be more realistic to their situation. So the nuclear deterrence, an arm of NATO's ability to mutually assure destruction against Russia, doesn't work. I mean, this doesn't mean that every missile doesn't work, but I mean, 2 for 2 is not great when you're talking about the chances of your missiles going where you want them to go and striking where you want them to strike. All right. I have some other things that I want to show you on my Twitter. This was just kind of a joke. I said, breaking news, Britain has come to an agreement with North Korea on the purchase of ICBMs after the recent back-to-back failed Trident launches. And then it's the sweet highlight video that Kim Jong put out. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to show you guys this because I just thought that this was interesting. These are the backpacks now that the Russian military is distributing. I don't know if this is exactly the Russian military or if this is there's some private organizations within the Russian military. I don't know what this is exactly, but these backpacks, they're basically ready to go UAV kits with FPV capabilities. They get delivered. They have drones in them. They have controllers and stuff like that. So this is quite the interesting little package that each drone operating unit probably receives. Something in this order. Just kind of interesting. Something to note. Yeah. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 drones can fit in one bag. So you send the guys out into the field with that, and they are able to operate. In international news, I guess, in regards to Ukraine, the German Bundestag voted against the resolution demanding the supply of Taurus cruise missiles, 182 for, 480 against. This is Germany's only deep strike weapon system. It is they don't have another one set up down the pipe like Britain does for the Storm Shadow. So the Germans not sending this is very understandable. They want to keep some military capabilities and probably keep some of what this missile can do a secret and not have it being used in Ukraine like Storm Shadows are. So I wanted to show you guys this. I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for showing this, but I don't really care. So just before we begin, the important part of this, a lot of people seem very confused, is not the truck at the beginning that doesn't have the, it's the same loading vehicle that a Patriot launcher might be installed on. It does not appear to have it, but that is not the important part about this strike. So I just want you guys to watch this strike. So here we can see, this is what I was talking about. So you can see that there's nothing on the back of this truck, right? But they followed this truck to a location where the actual target that I wanted to talk about is located. Okay, so we have the area where the truck drove into, and I'm going to show you guys the geolocation of this right in just a second. We have one strike by what appears to be an X-59 missile. And here you can see that the building that was struck, something is definitely burning on the inside of it. This could be anything though, right? It doesn't necessarily mean it's a Patriot. We don't know what it is. But when you look here, what this looks like, when you pause it, is the command and control vehicle for a Patriot air defense system. So that was what the claim was that was hit. This is what was claimed, was that a Patriot air defense command and control system was hit. Not the launchers, not the missiles, not all that, right? Not so much that. That might be here. We don't know, because this is a big warehouse full of all kinds of different stuff. But usually air defense missiles, when they cook off, they have a very particular look. They don't burn like this. This is fuel burning, right? So this is just a vehicle that got struck. There's no saying what it is exactly, but I'm going to show you the rest of the video, and I just want you guys to use common sense here. Okay, so throughout the rest of this video, you see vehicles driving into the nearby building, right? Same area, and then one, what I assume is an Iskander, and then another Iskander on these two buildings. So the Russians put considerable resources. There's a drone watching this. There's obviously a team following this. There are ambulances showing up to medevac the guys out. So obviously something valuable was hit. I'm not going to go ahead and say it was absolutely a Patriot air defense system or anything like that, but that is a very, very convincing series of events to occur in a row. The Russians would not throw 3 missiles at those buildings for, if it was just personnel, there's no way. So whether it was a Patriot air defense system that was being stationed there, and I'm going to give you my explanation for why I think it was that, if it was a repair facility, a storage facility, that's almost somehow worse, in my personal opinion, because the air losses that the Ukrainians are inflicting on the Russians right now, over the last 2 weeks, I think we've seen 2 that we have confirmation for. The Ukrainians claim 7, but we don't have any proof of that. So I'm going to stick with the 2 that I've actually seen, and the 2 that the Russians have also admitted to. That's not enough airframe losses to make a Patriot air defense system more valuable than, say, like a BMP or a tank repair facility, right? Getting vehicles back out into the line of combat, or artillery systems or whatever, is much more important than a Patriot system. So if this was a repair facility, that's worse. If it was some sort of storage for equipment, that's arguably worse, in my personal opinion. I'm going to take us over now to my map, just so I can show you guys where this happened and give you sort of my explanation for why I think this is exactly a Patriot air defense system that was hit. So if you look close, you can see the facility back over here where the Russians struck. Where is it? Oh, I'm tripping. Somewhere right around here. Hold up. Wait a minute. There's a little white dot. That's it, right? No? Huh. Hold on, everybody. I'll find it. Found it. Oh, right here. So this is the facility that was hit. This is the particular piece that you can kind of see in the video. Watch, I'll take us back over to the video maybe in a second, but this is the warehouses that were struck directly behind Kherson, close enough to the front. I mean, you're talking 10 miles from the front, probably 20 miles from the nearest Russian artillery in the area, right? So relatively safe, definitely at risk being that close to the front. But what the intended purpose is the aircraft taking off from Crimea, pushing up into this region, dropping glided munitions on Krinky and this bank, and taking them down. They've done it before with a Su-34, I believe, or something of the sort, a couple months ago in this region. They've done it also in Kharkov. They've also done it, I believe, over here somewhere down in Mariupol. So this was just the most recent addition or rendition of the Ukrainians going out close to the front with their air defense systems to strike Russian targets. So I do believe that a Patriot was hit. It looks very clear to me outside of not actually seeing the system. So we can't definitely determine, but everything is sort of adding up that that's what it is. And if it's not that and it's something, it's probably something even more important, and that's arguably worse. So back over to my Twitter again. Yeah, you can see the geolocation here. Here is some of the Ukrainian nationalists. Most of these people are probably dead now. This is 2019 and 2021. I imagine this one is 2021, and then this one is 2019. And one of the guys in the middle is the his code name is Da Vinci, and he died. I think she died too. I think I've seen a lot of these guys' obituaries. So, but the important reason for me showing this is because the Russians now are posting pictures in front of it, and this is in Avdiivka. So, if anybody knows what the red and black flag is, if anybody kind of knows what the wolf imagery is, and all this German writing, the German-looking writing, I mean, this is just like a Nazi's wet dream. So, very interesting. Very interesting. And then we have confirmation that the Tu-160 M bombers, the new modernized version of the Tu-160, have just been delivered. 4 of them had just been delivered to the Russian Air Force, and they've entered production. I don't know if we'll see more or not, but there is little old Putin sitting in the plane taking his picture. He went up and got to do a test flight, which was really cool. Um, whether you like Putin or not, going and flying in a strategic nuclear bomber, a supersonic strategic nuclear bomber, would be pretty cool. So, if you guys have questions, go ahead and get your questions in now. Go ahead, get them in, get them in, get them in, and I'll answer a few questions here while we're relaxing. Oh, I also wanted to talk about a event that happened in Ukraine. I'm just going to take us back over the map real fast while those questions are coming in. We had a Russian training facility pretty close to the front line down here in the Kherson region. They got struck by HIMARS. They're saying 30 Russians died. 25 to 30 Russians died. The video that was circulating was not the video from Kherson. That was a video from Kherson in the past, I think 2022, maybe 2023, but I'm pretty sure it was 2022. So that video was not accurate. And then there was another concentration of manpower that was struck. These Russian units were in formation for some stupid reason, like literally makes no sense. The stupidest shit I've ever heard in my entire life. Being in formation that close to the front. These military leaders, just like military leaders on the Ukrainian side who do this same thing, deserve to be reprimanded to the highest level, I would say. Putting 2 guys close together anywhere near the front this day and age is just a mistake, let alone 30, 40, 50 guys. It just doesn't make any sense. So questions, go ahead and get them in. Is the Tornado Battalion still active? I think most of the national battalions kind of all got lumped into one. I haven't actually seen anything about them recently. So, I mean, I think they took some pretty heavy attrition in the Kharkov region. And the writing says Right Sector Volunteer Corps. Yeah, that is Right Sector. I mean, they're standing in front of a Ukrainian nationalist flag, so it's definitely Right Sector for sure. Think Ukraine will last stand again at Kupiansk? No, probably not. I think that they are now their mind is a little bit more right when it comes to retreating from places. I think that the reality is starting to set in for the military and political leadership of what needs to be done to actually continue this war for as long as possible. They're not fighting to win now. They're fighting to stay alive. So I don't think you're going to see these epic Bakhmut style fights. I think you're going to see the Ukrainians trying to do as much damage as they slowly start stepping back from certain areas. Certain areas they can't, but Kupiansk is one of those areas they should be able to back off over the river. Question: how will Transnistria be defended if they decide to join Russia? With nukes. If they vote, if they, which hasn't been decided yet, but there is rumors that Transnistria uh, will Transnistria will have a referendum on if they want to join the Russian Federation. I think that they are thinking that they're going to be under severe pressure here soon by some parts of the uh, European establishment, the EU and NATO. So they're trying to get their basically what the Donbass did and trying to be recognized as a part of Russia. Um, I don't know if that one's going to work out as well. But if they end up being accepted as part of Russia and Moldova does something, it would be an act of war, right? I think that that's the way you defend it. You don't actually bring in troops. You don't do anything kinetic. You just threaten. You say, hey, listen, they're doing this. If you interfere with this, you're interfering with Russia. They're under our nuclear umbrella. I think that's the way that it's going to go down. What are the best and worst units in the Russian and Ukrainian militaries at the moment? So obviously, special forces is always going to be the best. Spetsnaz for the Russians. VDV is also very well trained. Um, and for the Ukrainians, it would be their special forces. They have a police unit that's very well trained. Uh, they took casualties in Avdiivka. The Azov battalion, any of the nationalist battalions, are the most fanatic. They're not necessarily the best fighters, but they won't surrender. They'll fight to the very end. So that's a very valuable group. And then the Ukrainian Marines are also very effective. But for the Russians, usually the most effective units are always like a lot of like the DPR units. The guys have just been fighting forever and they just have a lot more common sense on the front lines. Now the whole Russian military is starting to get to that point. There's still some officers that don't have the experience that they need and they make stupid decisions. But for a long time, the DPR units were pretty much the most successful when it came to like drone warfare and stuff like that. They were doing it way before the Russian military was doing it. Question: what is the scale on your high ground map? World War II books all talk about endless flat steppe, but your map shows. So it's only a couple 100 feet. It's not really. It's more like kind of like just a hill. It's like it's like looking out on the distance, and you can tell that something is like on higher ground than you, but it's not like a noticeable land formation. You're just like, oh, that's higher than me, right? So it's not like I'm trying to think of an example in the world. I don't know. Like Kansas is flat, but there are parts of Kansas that look down into riverbeds, right? Like that's how you have to think about it. Like there's always going to be low ground because there's erosion and there has to be somewhere for the water to pool. And so that's sort of what I'm talking about is you're kind of like it's just like hill in a valley, hill in a valley, hill in a valley sort of deal. But not a big hill, a very small hill, a couple 100 feet. It is pretty flat. It is relatively flat when you're talking about in terms of terrain. Question: do you think Zaluzhny will no longer play a role in the war? Once again, thanks. No, Zaluzhny is done. Zaluzhny has been done for a long time. He hasn't been probably making military decisions for a long time since the counteroffensive. I think most every military decision is being politically driven. I think Zelensky did him a favor by getting him out of there before Avdiivka fell, and hopefully he goes and makes a life for himself somewhere else, very far away from this, because nothing good that touches this is nothing good comes out of it. So, do you think Zelensky will know? Oh, wait, I just read that one. Do. Oh, here we go. Do you think the Russian president means by Russia? Oh, what do you think the Russian president means by that? He said it so many times. He just means that they're not in a full war, right? The Russians are not fighting the intensity of the war. You can call it a full scale war, right? That's fully understandable. There are many men dying. This is a war. This is not a what. But what he's saying is there are always escalation steps. Do the Ukrainians have electricity? Do the Ukrainians have internet? Do the Ukrainians have plumbing like sewage, uh, clean drinking water, stuff like that? Yes, there's a reason for that. The Russians have not targeted power generation to any great extent. They have hundreds of missiles, right? You would just direct all of your missiles like the US did during their invasions. You strike dual use infrastructure, anything that can be considered military, you strike. You completely destroy the country's economy. You put the domestic population into chaos, and then you capitalize on that, right? Militarily. That's not what the Russians did. That's not what they've done since the beginning. It's why the arguments for genocide and stuff are so weird. This is one of the most cautiously fought wars I think the human race or the human species has ever seen in terms of collateral damage and civilian casualties. I always say go and look at Gaza. More kids have died I think more kids have died in Gaza now than uh, civilians in total have died in Ukraine. In 2 years of high intensity war with thousands of missiles flying all around. I mean, it's just the collateral damage in the Ukraine conflict is so minute compared to other relatable conflicts. Like, look at the civilian collateral damage in Vietnam. It was horrific, dude. It was unbelievably bad. And it's just, I mean, it just doesn't get talked about because, I mean, the victors of the world write history, even if they didn't win that war. Um, let's see. Russia already spent 5,000 plus missiles of any kind on this war. How much destruction of city? Yeah, that's the thing, right? Is you don't see. I mean, you have Mariupol, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, right? Those are the big cities where the fighting has happened. The other cities are not destroyed. I mean, the cities that you're seeing destroyed have been evacuated. The fighting has taken place pretty isolated pockets for the most part. The most civilian casualties we saw was during the Battle of Mariupol, and that was when civilians were caught in the middle of an encirclement, and then the Ukrainians inside fought to the death instead of, you know, surrendering the garrison or whatever. They fought for weeks and weeks and weeks, and that's why all of those civilians died. I'm not blaming Ukraine for fighting, but it's not like the Russians went in there and they were like, "Oh, we're going to just kill a bunch of civilians in Mariupol." No, when things are fluid, a lot more mistakes happen. When things are stable, like they have been, civilians stop dying if they're not being targeted. Question. Do you think behind the scenes they now understand Ukrainian victory means grinding the conflict to a stalemate, or do you actually believe they can push the Russians back? No, I've never thought that they were able to push the Russians back. Everything that you've seen, every victory that you have seen is a battle. It's not the war, right? If you're looking at the grand scope of things, if you're looking at the actual war, there's no way that the Russians lose. Just mathematically, they don't lose unless the Ukrainians were inflicting like 200 to 1 like death ratio on the Russians and the domestic situation was horrible, then the Ukrainians could win. But the domestic situation is fine. The Russian economy is fine. The you know the overall military situation, the morale in the military is fine. There's nothing going on that would represent some sort of like like an area for a collapse to happen in the Russian government or military. It's just not there anymore, right? The sanctions were supposed to do that. They failed. There's no more sanctions to be put on Russia. There's no more anything, right? So, in terms of a Ukrainian victory would mean surrendering right now and getting as much out of the deal as you possibly could. Accepting neutrality, accepting everything, and then immediately right after that, try to get all of the people who fled to Europe to come back to Ukraine, and try to get everybody having babies right away, which is going to be impossible because you don't have an economy. So, there's just not there's no victory. There is no victory for Ukraine. There's just varying levels of defeat at this point. Question. Can you invite Mark Celaboa on a live stream? Yeah. I mean, if you know him, get him to message me. I don't know who that is. I might have seen him, but I just don't recognize the name. Shoot me a DM with his information, and I can see if he wants to come on or come on and have a conversation or what. How long until the U.S. start retreating worldwide? They're already talking about pulling out of Iraq and Syria. They're already failing Ukraine, and Israel. We'll see what happens in the Middle East. I don't know. Probably 10 years. I think in the next 10 years, you'll start to see the U.S. really start to shrink in terms of its sphere of influence. Casualty wise, Ukraine lost 500,000 versus 50,000 on the Russians. Do you want to talk? Do you want to talk? You can talk to him. No? See? You give him the mic and then he doesn't want to talk. Impossible. Well, now you want to talk? This is not impossible, right? This is not an impossible number. I think 500,000 Ukrainian casualties might be a little high. I think that everything on the Ukrainian side is exaggerated. So even the size of their military, I think, is exaggerated. And 50,000 on the Russian side seems very likely. That's what the U.S. That's what U.S. officials have said. Basically, that's what Mediazona has said. The only people who don't say that number, 50,000 Russians, I think it's somewhere around 300,000 total casualties. So a 4-to-1 death ratio or a 5-to-1 death ratio would put you right in between 50 and 70,000 Russian casualties, which is almost exactly what Mediazona estimates based off of their open source gathering. So that seems very, very likely. I don't know what the Ukrainian casualties are. I don't know how they're expending their manpower. I have no idea behind the scenes. We just don't have any open sourced information as to how many Ukrainians have died. Any reliable open sourced information. So, I was wondering about pets in Ukraine. What pets? Like dogs and cats? They exist. I don't know what you mean. Do you think the Russians will push up to the Dnieper River by summer? Absolutely not. There's no way. The operations take way, way longer than that. Unless the Ukrainian military ceases to exist tomorrow, no. It takes a long time to do that kind of push. Democrats hope for new voters in 5 to 10 years. Scott has a Ukrainian bridge troglodyte off camera in his yeah, that's his main source. Now, I do have a troglodyte, but not Ukrainian. Is it possible to capture Vuhledar without having to storm it? Yeah, so I'll show you that. That's why Pabyata, the capture of Pabyata, is so important. So we come in here. There's Ugledar. It's a fortress in this flat area. It's also located on the high ground, so it makes it advantageous for the Ukrainians to hold. This is its main supply route, and you can see that the Russians are moving in on capturing it. Konstantinivka, once the fighting starts around this town, Ugledar is going to be in a much, much more difficult situation. The Russians should be able to push up through these fields. A lot of this is mined, so this is going to take a very, very long time to do. But especially if the Russians cut the road down here and start to begin putting pressure on Vedyana from the north, Ugledar just becomes less and less valuable as time goes on. It's also been getting hit by glide bombs pretty consistently, so it's rather destroyed at this point. I think it will be stormed just because that seems to be the Russian way of doing things. But I don't think it's not a big. Once it gets stormed, once the Russians are inside, the fighting for it is basically over. Like the hard part is approaching it. That's where the disaster happened last year, where the Russians tried to push up through the minefields, and they lost a bunch of vehicles. got detracked and destroyed and stuff. So it's not so much about being in the city as it is making it to the city. Once you make it to the city, everything becomes a lot more smooth. Question: when will leeches like Palmazzaro and Michael Corello stop grifting? Never. That's what they do. They're grifters. It's literally what they do. Grifters just grift. They and they'll go on to the next thing as soon as this thing's over. I'm fully expecting the US just to start a war in Taiwan so people think forget about Ukraine. Like, honestly. Uh, how long will Zelensky last? Probably until the end, honestly. I think he's got a solid control on the government and military, so I don't think he's going anywhere. I think he's very hard to replace for the West because they've built Zelensky up into this hero, and it's why the Russians haven't assassinated him, right? Because I mean, it doesn't follow the rules of the SMO technically, but he's not, he's more valuable alive messing things up and being an irreplaceable tool that's not very useful. He's doing more damage than good right now for the Ukrainians. So why not let him continue that? His foreign policy is absolutely atrocious. Like, I know the situation isn't great, and I know the West can't do a whole lot, but they are doing no favors for themselves in the way that they behave. If I was the Ukrainian president and I was trying to win right now, I would be commanding everybody in the military not to be striking civilians, not to be doing dumb PR stunts, not to be aggravating the Russians in all these different ways by taking down planes like the IL-76 in Belgorod. The fighter aircraft is whatever. Those are legitimate targets, whatever. But the shooting down your own POWs, that shit, it doesn't play well, and it makes continued support when support becomes less popular even more difficult. So, in terms of foreign policy, Zelensky completely sold Ukraine out. He sold so hard, it doesn't even make sense. Maybe ignoring me because of my name. No, did you leave a message? I get so many questions. Oh wait, you're not talking about me. I don't think. Okay. All right. I think that's where I'm going to wrap it up, guys. Thank you so much. The news is starting to come out quicker and quicker, so should be a live stream tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. I'm going to set some stuff up this weekend for you guys too. Probably a show Saturday and Sunday. So be on the lookout for those. I love you guys. Be safe. Make sure you subscribe, like this video if you can, and share it around. I really appreciate you all, and I'll be bringing you more news tomorrow. Goodbye, everybody. Be safe.